What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next we are going to talk about what's going on in the comic market right now and the trends that I'm seeing. Stay tuned. Alright, before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. Really appreciate it. Helps the channel. So yeah, thanks for all the likes and subscribes that I've gotten recently. Now, I haven't actually done a market video in about 3 to 4 weeks. And part of the reason was I decided I wanted to keep watching and seeing what was happening and report on what I was seeing after I had a few more data points instead of just each week seeing, point move one spot up or one spot down, that kind of thing. So I thought I'd try out waiting a few weeks and then reporting on it. Now, if you're not familiar with these videos that I do, I watch the weekly Heritage comic auction, and I usually evaluate anywhere from, it was about 160 to 200 books, but their auctions have just exploded in size, and so now I'm generally evaluating about 270 to 300 books per week. And I estimate the price that I think that book's going to sell at. Then I also capture what that book's previous high sale is. Then I look at what the actual sales are from that auction, and I try to draw some conclusions about where the comic market is going, how strong the comic market is, that kind of thing. I also use this information for my top 10 high and low sales videos that I've been putting out each week. So I do make a few videos from this information from these sales. Now, even though I haven't been creating the market videos each week, I have been still recording all the data, tracking all the sales, and so you're going to see the data from those sales right about now. And if you've watched my videos in the past, you know that I look for 4 different numbers, and those are represented by the 4 lines, not the red one, that's a new one I added, that are on this chart. And the dark blue, green, and purple lines, they just tell me what's going on week to week. Because I am estimating new averages for whatever books are selling each week, if there had been prior sales more recently that had been lower or higher, I'm going to change my averages. So those are week to week sales numbers. The dark blue line is telling me how many of the sales went above my estimate. So if I had an estimate and it exceeded that estimate, this is telling me the percentage of sales that went above the estimate. The green and purple lines are just telling me the number of sales that went 20% or more above my estimate, or the number of sales that went 20% or less below my estimate. So it's telling me how extreme each week some of those sales numbers are. So if for these numbers, if I see continuously poor numbers week after week, that tells me that each week things are getting worse. And so I would expect to see continuously decreasing prices for books. If I see them continuously increasing, that number constantly going up, tells me prices are probably increasing. We're seeing increased strength in the market. If they're just fluctuating back and forth, hovering around the same line, just generally means not a whole lot of changes happening. We're seeing about what we would expect each week for these prices. You can see on this chart, I've highlighted the last 4 weeks in yellow just to kind of show the area that I hadn't reported on yet. And you can see things had been getting a little bit stronger. For about 3 weeks, it looked like things were getting a little stronger. This last week was pretty bad. It was definitely a step down in the last week. But the 3 weeks prior to that were actually 3 continuous weeks of pretty solid data. Now, nothing crazy, but just a general uptrend. Now, the line that I consider probably the most important is the light blue line. And what this is telling me is this is the number of new high sales. So, like I mentioned earlier, I record the high sale for each one of these books within that grade. And if this sale for this week exceeds that tells me it's a new high sale. And this is something where that's really telling me the overall strength of the entire comic market, at least from the perspective of this auction. Because if the market is really weak, you would expect to see very few new high sales. Market is very strong, you expect to see a lot of new high sales. And 4 weeks ago, the last time that I reported on this, I had the lowest number, a big dip in those new high sales. Still not a terrible number, it was still over 30%, which if you think about it, that is a lot of new high sales for books. But it was a big drop from where it had been. But then the last 4 weeks, we've seen this general uptick where it's just gradually been increasing more and more new high sales, where now we're at about 42%. Now, this is off the low of 33% new high sales, so it is an increase from there, but we're still a ways from the peak, which was 56% of sales hitting new highs. And that was back on May 30th. And like I've talked about, if you watched any of my other market videos or top sales and week sales videos, generally talked about that it really seemed like the peak in the market was sometime in around May. And that's what I'm seeing there with new high sales, 56% back in May. And then we saw a gradual decrease down to 33%. And now we're seeing an uptick again. And so trying to see maybe what does that tell us? You know, what could be going on? Are we starting to see some return strength because we're getting near the end of summer? We generally know that summer is a weaker time for comic sales. People are going to conventions, people are doing other things, traveling, spending their money on things other than comics. And so we're getting closer to the end of the summer. Is it possible that people are starting to get back into comics again, spending a little more? Now, one other thing that I added this week is that red line, and this is just an average of that new high sale line. So it takes the prior 3 points and averages them out. And so that will kind of smooth it a little bit. And you can see that for the last couple of weeks, it's started to turn up again, seeing positive numbers again. So definitely something to watch, that it seems like maybe as we're getting out of summer, we're starting to get some new shows like What If? We've got the Shang-Chi movie coming out soon. We're going to have Eternals coming out in November. Maybe people are starting to get excited again about comics, getting into buying, you know, some spec books, that kind of thing. We had the Suicide Squad movie come out, which me personally, I love that movie. Thought it was a lot of fun. So I think there's maybe just some renewed interest, and that's why we're seeing this increase in high sales. After this, I'll talk about the trends that I saw, but the first thing I just like to talk about is that because I'm a person that does sell quite a few books, I like to give my perspective on what I've seen and see how it maybe ties into what I see in the numbers from the Heritage auctions. And for me, July ended up being the best sales month I've ever had, ever. And so that's actually a little unusual, because usually the summer tends to be, like we said, a little bit weaker. But we'd seen this uptick, this increased strength, like I showed in the first 3 weeks of that 4-week period. And I definitely saw a lot of sales. I had the second most sales volume I've ever had. And in terms of profit from the sales, it was the highest I've had. And so for me, it was a very good month, which is why you saw me doing lots of unboxings, because I just use that to go buy more comics. And now, if you also have seen some of my prior videos, I had talked about what I was looking for was, when did it look like things had returned kind of more to a normal state within comics, where prices weren't going up 100% in a month. And that seemed like it was about late May, early June, and where we're back more to a normal, steady state. Prices have been dropping some. We've talked about that, where we've seen about 10 to 30% drops in prices across the board, which isn't a big deal because prices are up 200%. But I've seen that where we just aren't having those huge spikes anymore. So I started listing a lot more books in early June. And so that's another reason why I probably started seeing more sales, as I was listing a lot more books at that time, because I was comfortable with selling books again. And so just in general, what I experienced aligned well with what I saw with the Heritage comp numbers, which always feels good when you when you see something where the data that you actually are pulling from these sales actually aligns with what you see with your own personal sales. Now, August has been slower so far, and you know, I did show that downtick last week that I saw in the Heritage sales, and my sales have also been lower than what I saw in July and June. And so we'll just have to see what happens moving forward. Sadly, that just means that I buy less books, so there's, you know, not as many unboxings that I do. Like I said, we'll just have to see how that turns out as August continues on. Now, let's talk about some of the trends that I saw. And one quick thing that I've noticed is the Heritage comic auctions have gotten really big. I mentioned this maybe a couple weeks ago, that it used to be that they were around 300 books. Then it got up to 500, then 700, and now they finally split the auction into 2 days, where it's over Sunday and Monday instead of just Sunday, because it's over 1,000 lots. So not just 1,000 books, because some lots have multiple books, but over 1,000 lots every week. and it doesn't seem to have really impacted the sales numbers that much. This still seems to be really strong sales, so there is the demand out there for those books. Unfortunately, it also means I have to price a lot more books each week because there's more keys that are there, more books that I want to look at and that I'm interested in, which is why I've now been pricing 270 to 300 books each week instead of what I was doing before, which is around 160 to 200. Now, each time that I've been reporting on the market data, I've been looking at similar titles of books. And so that's just something where I can see what types of trends are happening within popular titles week to week. And I like to look at the titles that have a lot of different books that sell each week. And the first one is Amazing Spider-Man. And so I've put these into a little table now so you can see what happened the last 4 weeks. And you can see I've got 4 different numbers here. I've got the number of books that sold above my estimate, number of books that sold 20% or more above my estimate, number of books that sold below my estimate, and the number of books that sold 20% or more below. This is where I can just kind of get an idea how strong or weak that title is selling each week. You can see Amazing Spider-Man has actually gotten kind of weak. It's, other than August 1st, it had more books selling below my estimates than above, and this is really just a continuation of what I saw from my prior video. I was seeing some weakness starting in Amazing Spider-Man, and it looks like that has continued through July and now August. Now, if a trailer comes out for the next Spider-Man movie, I imagine that will have an immediate impact and likely a spike in a number of books across the Amazing Spider-Man title. But for now, it looks like there's definitely some weakness there. So, because we haven't had that trailer yet, if you're looking to get a Spider-Man book, this might be a time because we're starting to see some weakness. Like I'm showing here a number of books that are selling more below my estimates than above, so something to consider. Now, one other thing that I added in this week because of some requests that I'd had in comments in my prior market videos was just the issues that I had included in my estimate. So these are the ones that sold that week. Now, I didn't include every week here just because it would have just been a list of a whole bunch of numbers, but on August 8th, these are the books that I evaluated from Amazing Spider-Man that had sold in the Heritage auction. So you can see there are a bunch of keys. For example, I included Amazing Fantasy 15 because I consider that part of the Spider-Man run, but you had big issues like Amazing Spider-Man 1, number 9, First Electro, a couple issues of 129, the First Punisher, 3 issues of 14, the First Green Goblin, a couple issues of 238, First Hobgoblin, and so just a lot of key issues. And you know, there's always issues of 300, First Venom. It's just there's a ton of those out there, so they sell almost every week. But you can see there that there are a number of keys, and those are just examples of the ones that I evaluate each week. Now, the next title that I like to look at is Fantastic Four. And again, I've got the same data here. And you can see that Fantastic Four has been really strong the last 4 weeks. Every single week there were more books selling above my estimate than below. And even though it got a little weaker this last week on the 8th, still 9 above and 8 below, with 3 going 20% or more above. So it's been strong the last 4 weeks. Now, it had been on a pretty decent downtrend as part of my prior video 4 weeks ago. So maybe that had been a bit of a bottom there and it's starting to trend back up. So if there are Fantastic Four books that you're interested in, this might be a time to start looking because it could be telling us that prices are starting to tick back up for those books. Now, I did the same thing here where I included the issues from the August 8th sale that I evaluated. There was a Fantastic Four 1, as well as a couple issues of number 2, so the first Skrulls, issue 3, which is the first time they're in their costumes, just lots of big issues, 48 for Silver Surfer, 49 first Full Galactus, a couple issues of 52, the first Black Panther, so lots of key issues that were selling in that week for Fantastic Four. Now, the last title that I like to look at is X-Men. And in my prior video, X-Men had started to level off and even go up a little bit. In the first 2 weeks, you can see on the 18th and the 25th of July, that seemed to mostly continue. 18th was a little weak, July was pretty even, but no sales in that first week that were 20% above or 20% below, which means they're all pretty close around what I had estimated. But wow, the last 2 weeks, August 1st and August 8th, terrible, just terrible sales. There were 7 that were above my estimate and 21 that were below. And then this last week, there were 6 that were above my estimate and 24 that were below. So X-Men seems to be getting a little weak again, some relatively weak numbers there. And so that's something where really, like, this is the time. If you're looking for X-Men books, this might be the time to try to pick those books up. Because, again, this is one of those titles where we haven't really had any news yet about what they're going to do with mutants and the X-Men, but we all know they're coming eventually. And so if you've been looking for some X-Men books, you've been waiting for prices to maybe retreat a little bit, this might be the time to really start looking at that. This might be the time to go after some of those keys that maybe you've been waiting on. And again, I provided a list here of the books that I evaluated on August 8th. Just a ton of issues there. A lot of issues from the bronze copper time period, but you can see there were some big issues that sold that week. You had a couple copies of X-Men #1, 3 copies of X-Men 94, as well as just a number of other keys, like 2 copies of X-Men 129, First Kitty Pryde. So a lot of X-Men keys that sold that week. You can see how many sold these last 2 weeks. People are just selling them in droves compared to the prior weeks. Now, the other thing I like to talk about are just some general trends that I saw. And I'm just going to focus on this prior week because otherwise this video will be way too long. And so this prior week, it had been weaker. You'd seen that kind of general downtrend in a lot of the weekly sales data, and it was flat for the high sales. It stayed at 42%. But despite being a weaker week, there was a lot of strength in Golden Age. I saw really big sales from a lot of different titles, including All Select, Batman, early Captain America, Submariner, and a lot of pre-code sci-fi and horror. So Golden Age, that's been a pretty solid trend over the last few months. Golden Age has really picked up when a lot of the other titles have cooled off. Now, I did see just a lot of general weakness across Silver, Bronze, Copper Age type books. As I was scrolling through the listings and looking at the ones that were high and low, it was just really a lot of Silver, Bronze, and Copper compared to what I was seeing with Golden Age. Now, obviously, there were still high sales. There were still good sales sprinkled throughout, but it was clear that Golden Age was much stronger than the other ages during this last week. So I'm actually trying to see if I can come up with a way to filter that data based on the age, to see if there are general trends within the age, so that I can maybe pull out a little more information about where there's strength and weakness in the comic market. So overall, despite the last week being weaker sales, the last month has actually been pretty solid uptrend. And so I'll continue to say, I've said this before, it seems like we're having this weakness currently in the market, and that could be a good time to start picking up some of those books that had spiked really high or retreating in prices some before we get back into the movie season, out of summer, all of that, when people are going to potentially start speculating more again and seeing prices increase again. Amazing Spider-Man and X-Men, like I mentioned, have shown a lot of weakness recently, so I would especially check those titles out. Fantastic Four has been showing renewed strength, so maybe just watch that to see if it continues or if it starts to retreat a little bit again, like Amazing Spider-Man and X-Men, and see if there's a better point where you could buy into some of those books. But this is definitely the time where I would be watching for any books you had been maybe planning on or trying to pick up to see if you can find them at some pretty good prices right now. If you watch my channel regularly, you know that I split out the part where I talk about the high and low sales. That's in a separate video. If you haven't checked those out, please do. I think they're a lot of fun. I like making those videos. It's cool seeing the different books that beat, exceed my expectations and fail to meet the expectations on the really high and low end. It's just a fun part of these heritage auctions that I enjoy talking about. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see some more content like this. We've got more videos over here if you'd like to click on those and watch some more videos from the channel. I've got the subscribe button right here if you'd like to subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.